They built a bomber so powerful it carried 16 guns and turned the sky into fire, yet it failed so completely it almost doomed its own crews. But from that $5.6 million disaster came the Chin turret, a breakthrough that saved over 2,300 bomber crews before the war ended. At 11:47 a.m. on May 29, 1943, Captain James Hartwell climbed into the cockpit of his B-17 at RAF Alconbury, watching the ground crew slip the final belt of 50 caliber rounds into the plane's 17th gun position. He was 26, had flown 42 combat missions, and had never handled anything like what he was about to fly. The YB-40 weighed roughly 4,000 pounds more than any flying fortress he'd previously flown. In the 3 months before May, the 8th Air Force had lost 173 B-17s over Europe. Without fighters that could escort them the whole way, German interceptors butchered bomber streams on the return leg from deep Reich targets. Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from 12 hours high, where the B-17's nose guns could not track, while Bf-109s dove through formations to pick off laggards. Crews called it the gauntlet. Half the men never reached 25 missions. The fix looked simple on paper. If escort fighters couldn't accompany the bombers end-to-end, make a bomber capable of fighting like a fighter. Army Air Force's engineers stripped every non-essential item from a B-17F. Bombs were removed. The bombardier's station became a twin 50 caliber Chin turret. A second dorsal turret was fitted behind the radio room. Single waist guns were replaced with twin mounts. Additional cheat guns were installed in the forward fuselage. Ammunition capacity jumped to 11,275 rounds. An extra armor plate was welded around crew stations. 16 50 caliber machine guns on a single aircraft. They named it the YB-40, the Flying Destroyer. Douglas in Tulsa finished 12 conversions by March, and the 92nd Bomb Group at Alconbury received them in early May. Colonel William Reed picked 7 crews for the first combat test. Hartwell drew serial 425738. His crew called it Hedgehog. The added mass threw everything off. A standard B-17F climbed to 20,000 feet in about 25 minutes. The YB-40 took 48. The control yoke felt heavier and sluggish. The test pilot at Wright Field warned Hartwell that the center of gravity would be aft with all that ammunition behind the bomb bay. But the firepower dazzled Hartwell. He'd never seen that kind of weaponry on a bomber. The Chin turret alone could rip apart a Focke-Wulf before it closed to firing distance. Every attack vector would be covered, every approach met with overlapping fields of fire. The mission order was straightforward: escort the main formation to Saint-Nazaire and hit the U-boat pens. 7 YB-40s would sit in the most vulnerable positions: low squadron, trail element, wherever German fighters liked to hunt. Hartwell started the engines at 1:25 p.m. All 4 right-side Cyclone engines sounded smooth. The tower cleared them for takeoff at 1:50. Hedgehog rolled and a stream of 168 other B-17s followed. Target time was 4 p.m. If you want to see how Hartwell's flying destroyer fared against the Luftwaffe, please hit like and subscribe. Every like helps share these forgotten innovations. Back to Hartwell. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30. Flak bobbed in the sky over Guernsey. Radio traffic reported German fighters scrambling from fields near Rennes. Hartwell's flight engineer said fuel burn was higher than planned. The heavy, draggy YB-40 drank more gas climbing to altitude. Sunlight broke through scattered clouds at 4:02 p.m. The main formation dropped its bombs and turned for home. The now empty B-17Fs climbed faster and accelerated away. Hedgehog began to fall back. Hartwell hammered the throttles, but Hedgehog managed only about 148 mph, while the standard B-17s pulled away at roughly 160. Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, 31, the flight engineer who had logged about 200 hours maintaining B-17s before the YB-40 conversion, climbed down from the top turret to read the instruments. Cylinder head temperature on engine 3 was creeping into the red. The extra weight and drag were forcing the Cyclones to work beyond design limits. Morrison backed off number 3 before it overheated, and Hedgehog slowed to about 142 maps. The main formation was 3 miles ahead and closing to 4. Hartwell could see the other 6 YB-40s laboring at the back of their assigned groups, every one of them falling behind. From the waist, Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney reported contrails at 4 high, German fighters climbing to intercept. Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader based at Van's 6 or perhaps 8 aircraft, hunting stragglers. Hartwell keyed the intercom and ordered all gunners to track. The chin turret had good visibility. The ball turret rotated smoothly. Both waist guns reported twin mounts tracking. The first FW-190 dove in from 5 o'clock at about 200 yards. The tail gunner opened up at 800 and tracers stitched toward the attacker. The German pilot broke left and climbed away without firing. A second attack came from 11 high, 2 FW-190s in trail. The chin gunner tracked the leader and delivered a 4-second burst. 50 caliber slugs tore across the FW-190's cowling. Black smoke poured out and the fighter rolled inverted into a dive toward the channel. Delaney in the waist confirmed the kill. For 6 minutes, the YB-40's concentrated fire performed exactly as hoped. 3 more fighters approached, and all 3 broke off early when met with a wall of lead from 16 guns. But Hedgehog was still bleeding speed. The main formation was 6 miles ahead, then 7 miles. Hartwell could barely make out the bomber stream. Morrison reported fuel. They had burned 800 gallons more than briefed during the climb, and at current power had about 90 minutes of fuel. The main group would be on the ground in 70. Another pair of FW-190s showed at 2 o'clock. These pilots had worked out that the YB-40 could not keep pace. They circled at a distance, waiting for the gunship to drop further behind and be attacked simultaneously from several directions. Hartwell shoved the throttles again. Engine 3's temperature climbed back into the danger zone. Morrison watched silently. The Escort with 16 guns had become the prey it was supposed to protect. At 4:43 p.m., 3 FW-190s attacked from different vectors. High right, low left, and dead ahead at 12 o'clock. Hartwell couldn't dodge. The overweight plane turned like a freight train. He held altitude and the gunners opened up together. The chin turret tracked the frontal run, the top turret swung right, the ball turret spun left, and both waist guns fired through opposite windows. Spent brass rained through the fuselage, and the airframe trembled under the combined recoil of 8 guns firing at once. The lead FW-190's canopy shattered. It rolled and fell away, trailing smoke. The high attacker peeled off. The low attacker pressed home his run and fired a 2-second burst. 20-millimeter cannon shells tore into Hedgehog's right wing, severing a hydraulic line and spraying fluid across the window. Delaney reported the damage. The right landing gear hydraulic system had failed. If they returned, they'd have to crank the gear down manually. Morrison checked fuel again. 72 minutes to Alconbury at their present power setting. The main formation was 8 miles ahead and pulling away. Alone over occupied France, German fighters circled. The radio popped and another YB-40 crew from the 305th called in. Captain Richard Hayes in 42-5741 had also fallen behind. 2 YB-40s were now separated from the stream, both struggling to keep speed and both burning fuel faster than planned. Hayes suggested they form up together so combined defensive fire from 32 guns might deter the Germans. Hartwell agreed, and Hayes descended from 21,000 feet to match Hedgehog at 19,500. The FW-190s spread out, 4, maybe 6 visible. They weren't diving in on the 2 gunships, but they weren't leaving either. At 5:07 p.m., Hartwell crossed the French coast outbound and looked down at a gray, empty channel. 53 miles to the English coast, 41 minutes at their current ground speed. Engine 3 was running hot despite Morrison pulling power back twice already. They couldn't hold altitude much longer. Hedgehog slipped through 19,000 feet to 18,800, then 18,600. Hayes radioed that his number 2 engine oil pressure was falling and throttled back to avoid seizure. His ship slowed to 138 knots. Both crews watched fuel needles creep toward empty and hoped the German pilots would not follow them over water. Pat. 5:22 p.m. 2 BF-109s appeared at 6 o'clock high and began following the stragglers toward the channel. The tail gunners called the intercept, range 400 yards and closing. The fighters dove from 18,000 feet, their cannons beginning to fire at about 800 yards. Hartwell could not climb, accelerate, or turn hard enough to disrupt their aim. The YB-40 had become a large, slow target with open sky all around. Staff Sergeant Raymond Cack, 24, the tail gunner and a former skeet shooting champion from Cleveland, took the first shots. He tracked the lead BF-109 as it closed to about 600 yards, walking tracers through the air. The German pilot jinked, dove 20 degrees, and his wingman followed. At roughly 400 yards, both fighters opened up. Cannon shells ripped through Hedgehog's tail. One exploded in the horizontal stabilizer, another punched through the fuselage about 2 feet behind Cock's position. The aircraft shuddered and Hartwell felt the controls go mushy. Morrison climbed back up to inspect the damage. The elevator cables were still continuous, but the trim tab mechanism was stuck. Hartwell would have to wrestle the control yoke all the way to England. The Messerschmitt swung in for another run. Hayes's YB-40 unleashed every dorsal gun it had. The two gunships' combined volley filled the air with tracer streams, and the German fighters peeled off and climbed away. At 5:31 p.m., 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared from the northeast, long-range escorts returning from a sweep over Belgium who had picked up the radio calls about stragglers. Into France, and the P-47s did not pursue, instead forming up on both YB-40s and waggling their wings as an escort to the English coast. Hartwell checked fuel. 37 minutes remaining at the current power setting, 29 miles to landfall. They would just make it, but the lesson was clear. The YB-40 worked brilliantly as a weapons platform. Its heavy armament could shred any fighter that closed to range, and the chin turret alone had rewritten frontal defense. The extra weight, however, ruined its usefulness. After the standard B-17Fs dropped their loads, they climbed faster and pulled ahead. The YB-40 still carried some 11,000 rounds and roughly 4,000 extra pounds that turned it from protector into prey. Hayes called at 5:47. His number 2 engine had seized, oil pressure at 0. He feathered the prop and descended on 3 engines. Morrison ran the numbers and concluded Hayes wouldn't reach Alconbury. Maybe not even England, because his 3-engine fuel burn was too great. The English coast loomed at 5:53 p.m. Hayes aimed for the nearest field. RAF Manston on the Kent Peninsula declared an emergency and was cleared for immediate landing. Hartwell watched Hayes's limping gunship peel off toward the emergency strip. One YB-40 limped home on 3 engines, another was badly damaged and barely controllable. Both would require extensive repairs before flying again. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog set down at Alconbury. Hartwell hand-cranked the landing gear. The right main leg locked only 15 seconds before touchdown. Ground crews counted 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 1 severed hydraulic line, 1 jammed trim tab, and a damaged horizontal stabilizer. Colonel Reed was waiting at the hardstand and demanded Hartwell's immediate evaluation of the first combat trial of the YB-40. The so-called flying destroyer meant to escort bomber streams to Germany and back. Hartwell shut down the engines, climbed out with his flight suit drenched in sweat and his hands still trembling from 90 minutes of fighting the controls, and told Reed 3 words that would doom the program. It can't keep up. Reed ordered 7 more missions. Maybe the first run was a fluke. Maybe tactics or formation placement could fix the speed deficit. The second mission on June 15th against Leyen flew 4 YB-40s. All 4 fell behind after the bomb drop. The third mission on June 22nd against the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant at Halle sent 11 YB-40s. 1 was lost to flak and fighters, and the remaining 10 straggled home hours after the main group. Engineers at the depot tried fixes. They revised waste gun feeds, changed ammunition loading procedures, and shifted weight forward to correct the center of gravity. Nothing solved the core issue. A B-17F with bombs left the ground around 65,000 LLB and, after releasing its payload, dropped to roughly 48,000 LLB. The YB-40, by contrast, weighed about 68,000 LLB at takeoff and still tipped the scales at 64,000 LLB after combat. Some 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition that could not be jettisoned. On June 28th, 6 YB-40s attacked again over the target. They claimed 1 German fighter destroyed, but all 6 lagged behind the formation on the return. One crew reported being alone over France for 43 minutes. Alone meant exposed. The aircraft meant to shield the bombers needed shielding itself. The 8th Air Force tallied non-combat sorties. 48 missions flown, 5 confirmed German fighters destroyed, 2 probable, and 1 YB-40 lost. Every YB-40 had trailed its formation after the bomb run. Average separation was 7 miles. Average time alone over enemy territory, 38 minutes. Luftwaffe Fighter Command reviewed the intelligence and adapted quickly. The heavily armed B-17s were unmistakable. Extra turrets visible from any angle, no bomb bay doors, and they took up the most vulnerable slots in the stream. Once the formation dropped its bombs, the YB-40s became obvious stragglers and primary targets. The assessment from the German side was harsh. The YB-40's kills were too few to justify the risk. Pilots preferred to attack the slow, heavily armed bombers rather than avoid them. On July 29th, the last 2 YB-40s flew their final combat mission against the U-boat yards at Kiel. Both fell behind, both required fighter escort to reach England, and both landed at emergency fields short of base. In August, General Karl Spaatz canceled the program. The 12 surviving YB-40s were returned to the United States in November. Most were turned into gunnery trainers. 4 were stripped and converted back to standard bombers. The experiment died after 3 months of combat testing. The Army Air Forces had spent roughly $469,000 per conversion, 12 planes, about $5.6 million total, on a system that made bombers more vulnerable instead of safer. Yet one element of the YB-40 endured. Right field engineers combed the combat reports and noticed a pattern. Whenever a YB-40 engaged an attacker from the front, the assault stopped. The chin turret was decisive. 2 50-caliber guns firing forward with an unobstructed field of fire removed the blind spot at 12 o'clock high. Boeing adopted the design immediately. The Bendix chin turret from the YB-40 tests entered production in September 1943 as the Bendix Model A. 2 Browning 50-caliber M2s remotely controlled from the bombardier's station. 300 rounds per gun, electrically powered traverse and elevation. Douglas installed the turret on the last 86 B-17F DL airframes rolling out of the line, and those bombers deployed to England in October. Crews called it the answer to 12 o'clock attacks. Before the chin turret, the bombardier had only small cheek guns on the nose with limited traverse and coverage. German fighters exploited that gap with head-on passes. The chin turret closed that hole. The bombardier tracked attacking fighters with a simple sight and pressed the firing button. The twin 50s converged on targets at about 400 yards and created concentrated frontal fire that pilots accustomed to straight-on runs could not evade. Combat reports by November showed the effect. The 91st Bomb Group flying B-17Fs with chin turrets on a mission to Gelsenkirchen recorded 12 frontal attacks, 10 of which broke off early and 2 that pressed through and took hits. One FW-190 was confirmed destroyed and no bombers were lost to frontal attacks. Boeing integrated the chin turret into the B-17G production model, the first of which rolled off in December 1943. The G model became the definitive flying fortress, built in Seattle, Wichita, Long Beach, Tulsa, and Burbank. Production accelerated quickly, about 50 aircraft per month in January 1944, 120 per month by March, and 230 per month by June. By the time production ended in April 1945, manufacturers had delivered 8,680 B-17Gs, each equipped with the chin turret that had its origins on the failed YB-40 program. The 303rd Bomb Group converted to B-17Gs in February 1944 and saw frontal attack losses drop from 12% to 3%. The 379th recorded a similar decline from 11% to 4%. The 384th's data showed 43 bombers lost to frontal attacks in 6 months before chin turrets and 14 lost over the subsequent 12 months. 8th Air Force analysts estimated the chin turret reduced losses from frontal attacks by about 71% across units and theaters. By VE Day, the B-17G equipped 26 heavy bombardment groups in Europe, 4 groups in Italy, 2 in the Pacific, 32 groups in all, and each group typically deployed 48 aircraft on standard missions, meaning as many as 1,536 B-17Gs could be in combat at once. The The YB-40 program itself lasted 3 months, flew 48 combat sorties, claimed 5 German fighters, cost $5.6 million, and failed as an escort concept. But the Chin turret from those 12 experimental gunships went on to arm 8,680 flying fortresses, protect crews on more than 290,000 combat sorties, and is credited with saving roughly 2,300 bomber crews who otherwise might have been lost to frontal attacks. The flying destroyer perished, but its key innovation lived on. The Chin turret was not the only useful idea to survive the trials. Engineers also noticed 2 other practical improvements. Standard B17s originally had waist gun positions directly opposite each other, which led gunners to collide, block one another during beam attacks, and impede full traverse while tracking fast targets. Combat footage showed waist gunners jostling and interfering with each other. The YB-40 moved the right waist gun position forward by 30 inches, creating a staggered layout that gave each gunner space to operate and prevented collisions during simultaneous side attacks. Boeing adopted the staggered waist positions for the B-17G, and crews reported about a 40% improvement in field of fire. Fewer jams from hurried reloads and better coordination when both sides fired at once. The 94th Bomb Group documented those gains firsthand. Before the staggered arrangement, waist gunners typically interfered with one another after about 12 seconds of engagement. With the offset layout, they could track continuously for roughly 27 seconds. The third useful change sprang from examining the YB-40's tail position. Sergeant Kak had reported cramped sight lines from the standard tail station during combat, small windows, restricted visibility, and difficulty following fighters attacking from low at 6 o'clock. The Thunderbolts dove toward the Messerschmitts. The German pilots turned east. The Army Air Forces contracted the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming to rework the tail, larger glazing, improved sightlines above and below, sturdier gun mounts, and beefed-up armor. They called the result the Cheyenne tail, and it became standard on late-production B-17Gs. 3 practical improvements emerged from a failed program: the Chin turret, staggered waist guns, and the Cheyenne tail, all folded into the B-17G and all saving lives on missions for the rest of the war. Captain James Hartwell went on to fly 16 more missions in standard B-17Fs, finished his 25-mission tour in October 1943, survived and returned to Pennsylvania, and never flew another YB-40 after that first Saint-Nazaire sortie. In December, he came back to Alconbury as a training officer just as the first B-17Gs arrived. He watched crews inspect the new bombers, point at the Chin turret, and ask where it had come from. Hartwell explained the story. The YB-40, the gunship that couldn't keep up. The 3-month program canceled before summer ended, and then he walked them through the turret. How the bombardier operated it, its fields of fire, and the ammunition loading procedure. The crews listened and understood. The Chin turret that would protect them sprang from an aircraft that had failed, an expensive error costing about $5.6 million and lasting only 3 months in combat. One pilot asked Hartwell if the YB-40 had been worth it, worth the money, worth the effort, worth risking the crews who flew those 12 conversions knowing they'd lag. Hartwell looked at the B-17G on the hardstand, the Chin turret catching the weak English light, and thought about head-on assaults, W-190s diving in at 12 o'clock high, and the new weapon that could stop them. He thought about the 8,680 bombers that would carry that turret before the war's end. Worth it, he told them. Every mission, every dollar, every dent and bullet hole in Hedgehog's skin. The YB-40 taught how to fail forward. The last YB-40 combat sortie flew on July 29, 1943. By August, the program was canceled, and by November, all 12 survivors were back in the United States. Most became gunnery trainers, a few were scrapped, and one even appeared in a scrapyard scene in the 1946 film, The Best Years of Our Lives. No complete YB-40 survived the war or made it into museum collections. The flying destroyer faded from view, but its innovations spread everywhere, on every B-17G over Europe, in every bomber crew spared a frontal attack, in every pilot who reached 25 missions because an FW-190 peeled off when Chin turret tracers found it. The 8th Air Force flew more than 290,000 combat sorties with B-17Gs. The chin turret saw action on roughly 114,000 of those flights. Conservative estimates credit it with preventing about 2,300 bomber losses, roughly 23,000 crew members who returned home. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton now displays a B-17G, tail number 44-83514, shoo baby, restored to flying condition with the chin turret gleaming under the lights. The plaque notes the turret was standard on G models, but does not tell the YB-40 backstory or the dozen aircraft whose program lasted only 3 months. History remembers triumphs. The B-17G that helped win the war, the flying fortress that could take enormous damage and bring crews home, and tends to forget flops, the YB-40 that couldn't keep up, the $5.6 million experiment that became a liability rather than a shield. Yet failures teach what success cannot. The YB-40 proved that well-conceived ideas, poorly executed, can still contain invaluable elements. Costly mistakes can yield priceless innovations. 3 months of combat trials can produce fixes that last years. Boeing's engineers treated the program as research. Keep what worked, fix what didn't. The chin turret worked. The added weight did not. They kept the turret and jettisoned the weight, a simple, effective, life-saving choice. If this account moved you, please like and subscribe so more stories like this reach people. We're pulling forgotten histories from archives every day, tales of engineers, pilots, and crews who turned failure into progress. Tell us where you're watching from and whether anyone in your family served. That keeps these memories alive. Thank you for watching and for making sure the YB-40 crews don't vanish into silence. They failed spectacularly, but their failure saved thousands.